The story I want to tell you is not about me. It's a series of situations experienced by my brother and his family for quite a few years. I tried by all means to help them, but it was impossible because beyond the fact that they were always aware of this, little by little they were downplaying it, or as if they naturalized it, or it seemed that they are not aware that this possibly and at some point will end in the worst way. I can't mention their names for the simple reason that I don't have their authorization to disclose this. Moreover, he doesn't know that I'm doing this, and also because his wife is a very well-known public figure in the Argentine media, and she would never accept that these things come out freely. This is also a very important point for them when it comes to receiving help. You might ask, why am I telling this then? Firstly, because I believe I should do it. I can't explain it, but I feel that in one way or another this could benefit them. But it's also because even though they were always the ones most harmed, I was also involved a while ago, albeit in a much lighter way. My brother got married in 2003. They moved to a little house in Greater Buenos Aires. There they had their first daughter, and after a while, due to work issues, they moved to a house in Federal Capital. This was the beginning of a whole story that literally started to destroy them. I don't have the exact date, but I think this house I'm mentioning, they bought it at the end of 2008 or the beginning of 2009. By that time, I was living in Vicente Lopez. I had gotten married, had 2 children. They were twins. My life was the most normal until I found out what was happening without me knowing it. One weekend, years later, I unexpectedly dropped by my brother's house. I had brought something for a snack. I had bought a gift for my niece, and I never thought I would come across a scene that at least left me more than worried. First of all, it caught my attention that my sister-in-law, when she opened the door, was extremely disheveled. Being a woman who normally always kept herself impeccable, with a very good mood, a countenance that was to be envied, but that day was different. I entered the house, my brother came to greet me, and almost immediately I noticed that something bad was happening. I saw them in a bad mood, but even so they invited me in. They were happy that I was going to visit them. They made a great effort to receive me as always. The thing was that we sat down to have a coffee, and while we were chatting, at one point I couldn't stand the intrigue anymore, and I asked them if everything was okay because I noticed them tired. That was the word I chose. My brother was the one who sighed while looking at the coffee. Then he looked at my sister-in-law, and without taking his eyes off her, they were looking at each other. He tells me that things were strange. And when I asked him why, he tells me that for months they had been living very, very ugly situations at home. I immediately thought it was about problems in the relationship, or maybe because of a neighbor. I had no idea, and they were only telling me bits and pieces. After a while, they tell me that things were happening that had no explanation and were driving them crazy. In fact, to understand the magnitude of this, my niece wasn't there that day, because every time they had the chance, they would send her to her grandmother's. In short, that day they confessed to me that for a long time they had been living with something in the house without anyone knowing. They couldn't sleep, they couldn't work, and on those particular days they couldn't even stand to be inside the house, specifically in the living room. Honestly, I didn't know what to tell them, because I knew perfectly well that they had never been religious, and moreover, they were completely skeptical about almost everything related to the esoteric or paranormal world. So, their telling me this threw me off. It all started, according to them, shortly after they moved in, and not exactly in a mild way. It was quite the opposite. One night they had gone to bed, and they felt that a man, at least by his voice, was asking for help from the kitchen. It was a heartbreaking scream. My brother got up immediately and ran off. He heard this scream the whole time, but when he turned on the kitchen light, there was absolutely no one there. The weeks went by and these events changed. For example, sometimes it was this man, other times it was a woman who screamed, cried, or spoke, but never, or when they went to the place where it was heard, they could see anything. Other times they heard a little boy running around the house speaking very softly and knocking things off the shelves. It was terrifying because they even managed to see him one night and not realize that he didn't have a face, but rather it was a completely black spot in its place. That morning when I arrived, they were very bad, very distressed, because the night before my niece woke up in the middle of the night screaming because something had squeezed her. When she opened her eyes, she found a very angry woman holding her. That's how she told it to her parents. My niece screamed and this woman disappeared. They thought she had a bad dream, but when they checked her, she had a very, very noticeable mark on her right ankle. Until that day, they had never suffered any kind of physical aggression. That's why they had made the decision to take her to her grandmother's house, which they had been doing in fact because she had been having trouble sleeping for months, but that event scared them a lot. My suggestion after listening to them was to tell them to ask for help at the church. They were never religious, but in these cases, I think it's a good place to start looking for answers. But they refused because precisely my sister-in-law, who was having a very good work year that year, did not want this issue to leave her house and maybe harm her. So they stayed like that, living with this entity or whatever it was from then on. We didn't see each other very often, but we did talk by messages or by phone, and I found out that things, far from improving, were getting worse week after week. An important fact, at least from my point of view, was that my brother was always suffering from chronic headaches, muscle pains that became unbearable. He got sick very often and without really knowing why. My opinion is that this energy was and is responsible for everything. My sister-in-law is also unwell. I say it now. Beyond trying to hide it, she looks different. It's clearly seen how this time has been consuming her little by little. And to see their relationship seems to be fine. Although that joy they had, I can assure you it disappeared. But it's my niece who had the worst time. 2 years ago, for example, she told her parents that every night there was a man who sat on her bed and watched her. She, still being little, was used to living with these situations, so she no longer screamed in desperation. Of course, she was very scared, but her defense was to close her eyes, cover herself, and think about something else. The issue was that she also started to feel sick, suffering from vomiting every day. At first, she was diagnosed with gastritis, which was later ruled out as the weeks went by. But everything took an unexpected turn when my brother walked into her room one night and found something terrifying. My niece was standing on her bed looking at the ceiling with her feet slightly suspended. According to my brother, she was floating in the air. And that time, the cold she felt in the room was much greater than what they were used to. After that night, they finally went to a church. I think it was evangelical, although I'm not entirely sure. At the place, the pastor, upon seeing her, immediately realized that the girl had a very heavy entity attached to her, and that was why she had been dealing with so many discomforts for a long time. He didn't doubt for a second that my brother was telling the truth about this levitation. What's more, he told them that it was only a matter of time before this entity took over their daughter's body in a more aggressive way. In short, it could possess her. And speaking very, very personally, what truth is there in all this that the pastor said? I don't know, but that's what he explained to them that day, and everything I told was what my brother's family went through for a long time. My niece had 5 rituals in total. One was that same night, and over the course of about 2 weeks they did the other 4, apparently completely freeing her. And I say apparently because from my point of view, I suspect that something is still wrong. But the issue, and the pastor told them, was that beyond everything they did, they would have to solve the root of this matter in that house. It was evident that there was something benefiting this interaction with the entities. But they remained calm because my niece was fine, and from that night she was able to sleep perfectly as she hadn't done in a long time. And in a way they relaxed because the house was quiet, at least. For the moment, because later on everything started again. I should clarify that everything I'm telling is what little I know based on what they've told me. Personally, I couldn't be very involved due to various family and personal issues, and also because they are quite private about their personal life. Plus, I feel that there is something dark that prevents them from receiving help. A few months ago, I went to my brother's house and realized that everything was wrong again. They are constantly fighting, and the inside of the house is in a condition that I could describe as abandoned. From the outside, you wouldn't notice because it's an old house, typical of the capital, but inside it's very different from what I was used to seeing. All three are off. You talk to them and you feel something horrible, and I also say it for my niece, unfortunately, who to this day has a look that I assure you is scary. They don't open the windows. I could tell you they don't clean. I don't even think they're bathing regularly. That time, I insisted they ask for help. Go back to the church, or maybe go to someone else who knows how to clean a house discreetly. But do you know what happened? They just threw me out on the street. When I mentioned this, they got very angry, especially my sister-in-law. And without any sense, they asked me to leave because they had things to do. The funny thing is that you see them outside the house and they are normal people, or at least they seem to be, but when they are inside that house, they change completely. That house has something inside, I'm sure. Who knows why? Maybe there's some portal that's the door for these entities to come and go as they please. I don't know. And it's frustrating for me because I can't help them. And one thing I would like to mention is that not long ago I went to their house, and after entering I gave them a stamp of Saint Michael the Archangel that I had kept. It was even blessed. When they saw it, I'm not lying, it seemed like I was showing them something out of place, something that was wrong for them. They got angry, telling me that there was no room for nonsense in that house and that they were more than fine, so they were not going to accept it. I had to bring it with me, but the strangest thing was that from that very moment, when I leave the house and touch the sidewalk, I started to feel bad. I had an extreme headache, a strong urge to vomit, and I got so scared that I went to the first church I could find, the parish of San Miguel de Bari. And when I entered, I almost fainted. I felt something impressive, I'm not lying to you. It was like as I crossed the door, something was separating from my back. And I returned to the same thing I already said. I don't know what's behind all of this, what's real and what's not, but I can be sure that that house is, without a doubt, a place where no one should be. And for anyone who is wondering about some issues, of course I suggested they sell it, but they flatly refused. And I also asked around the block about the previous owners of this mansion, and no one could give me a clear answer. The closest thing to the truth was knowing that the last owners were a family with the surname Gutierrez, who, after the death of their 2 children, abandoned the house in 1993 and returned to Italy. From there, it remained empty until my brother and his wife bought it. And now, about what happened inside there that could be responsible for all these events, unfortunately, I couldn't find any data that could help me, and of course, help you. The only thing I hope for is that this situation has a happy ending and they can live fully.